In this video, I'll be covering all the different settings that I've set up for my default startup file in Blender. So I've set up these default settings to speed up my workflow, I've turned on different add-ons, and I've even customized some of the Blender shortcut keys. So maybe this video will give you some ideas on how you can improve your own Blender startup files. And also let us all know in the comments some different tips that you have on setting up your own default startup file, because maybe I'll learn about some new things and improve my own default startup file in Blender. Now I'm also going to be going over some different add-ons that I've installed in Blender, and so I'll have all the links in the video description to those add-ons. Now some of them are free and some of them are paid add-ons, and also some of the add-ons I do have affiliate links to the add-ons, so if you purchase the add-ons through my affiliate links in the description, then I'll earn a small commission. So first what I'm going to do is click on File, and I'll click on Defaults, and I'm going to click on Load Factory Settings, and then I'm going to click on Load. So this is all the default settings in Blender when you first open up Blender without any of your own customized settings. So what I'm going to do is click on Edit, and we're going to go to the User Preferences. The first thing I want to do is go to the interface, and I want to turn up the resolution scale. So I have this resolution scale around something like this, like maybe a 1.27 or maybe like a 1.3, and this way it's a lot easier for you to read everything when I'm doing a tutorial, but also it's a lot easier for me to read all the buttons and things. Now if I go over here to Key Map, I have the Select with Mouse button to right click select, and this is because I used Blender before Blender version 2.8, so I had already been using Blender for many years with right click select, so I just built up muscle memory and kind of got used to it. However, this is actually something that I don't recommend since left click select is default, and it makes a lot more sense and it's easier to learn. You can definitely just use the left click select. Now another setting in Blender which I really don't like, and I believe this was a setting that was added in version 2.8, is you press A to select everything, but then if you just hit A, it's not going to deselect everything, so you have to double tap A. Or you can also press Alt A to deselect everything. Now personally I really hate this setting. I could just never get used to it and I really don't like it. So what I did is I clicked on the Select All Toggles button. This way I could just quickly just hit the A button, and that's going to toggle between deselecting everything and selecting everything. I just don't know how anyone could use double tapping the A key. It's really annoying because sometimes I like hit it twice and then it like selects everything again. Now if I click here on Save and Load, I have this autosave, and I'm going to turn the autosave to the very smallest of just 1 minute, and that way it's going to autosave in your temp folder and it'll autosave every 1 minute. Now there's also this save versions here, and I really don't like the save versions because when you save a Blender file in your folders, it'll save it as a .blend. Then when you save the file again, it'll save a .blend1, which is the last save, and then your most recent save is a .blend. But I personally don't like that because there's just all these .blends and .blend1s. So what I do is just turn the save versions to 0 so it doesn't make extra saves. Now over here on System, I have a GPU, so I set this to Optics, and then I use the NVIDIA GPU that I have, the GeForce RTX 280 Super. Now there's also a video sequencer setting here, and I edit all of my videos with Blender, and so there is a memory cache limit. And so I've set this to a really big number here, and I believe this is about 10 gigabytes because I do have a lot of RAM on my computer, so I'm giving the video sequencer more RAM so that it can work a bit better. But definitely don't turn this too high, because if you turn this to a really high number and then you're like video editing and Blender's just saving more and more cache, it might fill up all your RAM, and then that's just gonna completely freeze your computer. So definitely make sure you don't turn this too high. Now this is a more recent feature in Blender 4.5, but if you go to System here, you can change the back end to Vulkan, and I've heard that using Vulkan is a lot faster than OpenGL. Personally, I haven't really noticed any improvement, but I've definitely watched some videos. A lot of people have compared it, and Vulkan does seem to be faster, so I'm going to use Vulkan. Now also, I'm not sure if this is default. I don't think it is default, but there is this autosave preferences, but I don't like to turn this on because I like to just enable things or change the settings and then just kind of see how the settings are, but I don't like it to auto save the preferences. So I just keep that turned off, and I can click on that button there if I want to save the preferences. Now when you are saving an image or like rendering an image or something like that, let me just hit F11 to bring up the render result here. You can see it brings it up in a new window, and personally I really don't like this. So in Blender's user preferences, right here if you go to editors and then temporary editors, you can change the render in to image editor instead. So just change that to image editor. Then here in the file browser, you can change this to maximized area. So this way it isn't going to to open up these extra editors. Of course, for the user preferences, I like it opening up in a new window, but I don't like it opening up a new window when I'm like saving a Blender file with the file browser or rendering. Also, on the status bar, you can turn on like a bunch of these settings, like the scene statistics, which are going to show like the vertices and faces. I definitely like that. I also really like using the memory so that it will show how much memory Blender is using. So this information here is going to show up right down here in the very bottom bar of Blender. So I do have all these turned on except the scene duration. I just really don't care for the scene duration, but the others are turned on. Now, if you go here to the System tab and go to Memory and Limits, there is the undo steps. And so I like turning this up to the very, very maximum, because if you can have more undo steps, you might as well use it. So let's say I'm doing something in Blender and then, I go into edit mode, but then I mess something up. And so Blender actually stores those steps in the memory. So every time you do something, it'll store it in the memory. So I turn it to the very maximum. And that way, if I'm working on something really big, but then I mess something up, I can just hit Control-Z a bunch of times just to undo it. Now, because I turned on the right-click select for the user preferences, I can't right-click to bring up the object context menu. So it's automatically set to the W key. So that's how Blender has it set up. So if you have right-click select, you can use the W key, and then I can, for example, do like shade smooth. Now, I like taking screenshots in Blender, especially because I create a lot of 3D products. So I want to take a screenshot of my Blender file or a screenshot of the viewport. Now, if you click here on View, you can click on Viewport Render Image, but there isn't actually any shortcut key for this. So I've set the shortcut to F10. So if you click on View and then go to here to Viewport Render Image, you can right click and then click on Assign Shortcut, then hit F10. And now if I just hit F10, it's going to assign that. But then to make sure that this is turned on all your future Blender projects, you'll need to open up the user preferences and you'll need to click on the Save Preferences button. So you can just save the preferences as you are kind of adding these different features and custom settings. Now, if you click on Edit and go to the preferences, you can actually see there is a shortcut key, but I really don't like this shortcut key. I like using the old shortcut, which was in an older version of Blender. So if I just right click and then change shortcut, I can press Control-Alt-U. And that was actually an old shortcut in Blender that they removed, but I really like it. Now also, because I create video tutorials like I'm doing right now, I have Blender full screen, and that way you can't see like my hotbar on Linux Mint, so you can see all of Blender and it's really large. So I like to go into full screen a lot, so there's this toggle window full screen, but again, this doesn't have a shortcut, so I right click, assign shortcut, and I use Control-W. So once you've gone through all the settings, you can just click on the Save Preferences button. I still need to go over the extensions though, so I'm going to go to the extensions, and so I do use the Allow Online Access, and so if I click on that, this is going to allow us to download extensions from Blender's website, from the Blender Extensions website. So I have the ANT Landscape for adding landscapes, then also the Add Camera Rigs. This is cool. I actually have a tutorial where I show you how to use that, and I actually should use it more because I often forget to use it, but it's a really cool like camera rigging setup. Then there's also Bolt Factory, so this is useful for creating bolts, and I do have a video on how to use that. Then we also have the Bool tool. I don't think I've used this add-on for a while, but it's a useful extension for using like Boolean operations. Then there's Cell Fracture. This is really cool. I've used this in some of my tutorials. It's really useful for like breaking up a mesh. Then we have the Extra Curve and Extra Mesh objects. These are super useful. These have a lot of different extra objects which you can add, so they're like default primitive objects. Loop Tools is very useful for making a mesh circular. So if you're in edit mode and you have like a circle, you can use Loop Tools and then that'll make it a circular shape. Also Modifier Tools. This is really useful. For example, applying all the modifiers at once. And then also there's the Sapling Tree Generator. This is pretty cool for adding some basic trees. So now let's go over the different add-ons. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, some of these add-ons are free and some of these add-ons are also paid. And I do have affiliate links to many of these add-ons on the Superhive market. So if you are interested in purchasing any of these add-ons, if you purchase them through my affiliate links, then I'll earn a small commission. So the extensions are actually also going to show up here on the add-ons tab. So I'll go over the other add-ons which we haven't already gone over. So there is the Easy HDRI add-on. This is an amazing add-on. It is free, but you can also purchase it to help support the creator. This is an amazing add-on for looking through HDRIs and adding HDRIs. And then you can also set like a default folder so that the add-on can find your HDRI. And also if you go to the user interface, I like turning the thumbnail size to tiny so that I can see more of them. And then also the add-on location, you can have it the 3D view, which is like the end side panel, but I have it set to world so I can just see it when I go to the world settings. And of course everyone knows about this one, but the node Wrangler, very useful, so definitely turn this one on. Then another add-on which I really like for texture baking is Oven. So Oven is a really easy to use Blender add-on for texture baking. So if you're interested in purchasing, links are in the description, and I also do have an add-on review video where I show you how to use the add-on. I also use Physical Starlight and Atmosphere, an amazing Blender add-on for getting realistic skies and sky lighting, and I do also have an add-on review video for this as well. Now also, I can search for Rigify and I can turn on this Rigify. This should be built into Blender, so you just need to install it. And this is really cool for adding built-in armatures. So you can have like some human armatures and like some bird armatures. I think there's like a dog armature and some other pre-built armatures for rigging. And then for recording my video tutorials, I use this amazing Screencast Keys add-on. Now this add-on is free, so you can download it on their GitHub page, or you can help support the creators and purchase it on the Superhive Market. Also, another free add-on is UV squares. So this is really useful. The main thing that I use it for is like straightening out UVs. So again, this is free. You can get it on the GitHub page, or you can help support the creator and purchase it on Superhive. Now, another baking add-on, I went over Oven earlier, but another baking add-on which I like to use is Auto Bake. Now, for me personally, if I were to summarize these two, I would say that Oven has a bit simpler of an interface. It's a bit easier to use. However, I would say that it does lack a few features. It doesn't have quite as much of the complexity as Auto Bake. Now, Auto Bake, I would say, is a little bit harder to learn, but it has a lot more features, and you can definitely do a lot more with Auto Bake. And then another amazing add-on is Decal Master. So Decal, here it is, Decal Master, an amazing Blender add-on. I've definitely used this in some tutorials, and I have an add-on review video for quickly adding decals. So you can click on Save Preferences once you've set that all up, and I can close the user preferences. So now what I'm going to do is go over here to the render engine, and I do use Cycles as my rendering engine as default because I use Cycles for almost everything. However, I am going to switch over to Eevee because there's a few settings that I like to have turned on default when I use Eevee. So if I change it over to Eevee, I'm going to turn on Motion Blur because that makes Eevee look more realistic, and I'm also going to turn on the ray tracing. But then I'll change this back to Cycles because I do prefer to use Cycles for most things. Now for the Cycles settings, if I open up the sampling here, I personally really don't like the noise threshold. I know it can be useful if you have some spots which are more smooth and other parts which need a lot more samples, but I just like having super customizable controls, so I might use it sometimes, but on default I like turning it off. And then here on the viewport samples, I just have this turned to a small value. I think I use like 10, but for the render samples, I have this to 100. And then also I use the denoise here, and I've also changed a few other settings, like I've changed this to optics so I can use my GPU, and then albedo and normal. Now also, if I go right down here to the color management, the default view transform is AGX. However, I really don't like using AGX because it kind of makes some of the colors look a bit washed out, and so I just prefer to use Filmic instead. I just like it a bit better, so I set it to Filmic. Now you could change the look here to like high contrast or very high contrast. I usually use these when I'm rendering. However, I also do video editing in Blender, and so when I'm doing video editing, it actually makes the video editing look really weird. It kind of messes up the colors on the actual video when I'm video editing. So I have it set to none here on the look, but then when I'm actually 3D rendering, I change it usually to high contrast or very high contrast. And also, if I go here to the materials, there is already a default material, and I really don't like that, so I just click on the X here to get rid of the material so it has no materials in the scene. So now I'm going to go over a few of the different layout settings. So you can see there's a scripting tab here, but I don't even know what this is. I don't do really any coding. I know nothing about coding in Blender or anything, so I can just right click and I can just delete this. Also here on modeling, I just really don't find this very useful because I just use mainly the layout. Like the layout is the layout, so that's where you're going to do most of the work in Blender. So I don't know why you need a modeling if you already have a layout. So I just delete the modeling tab. And then I use the shortcut keys because I work really fast, so I don't use these settings, so I hit T to close the side panel. Also, I don't use the gizmos because, again, I use shortcut keys, so I click on this button here to hide the gizmos. Now, as far as the matte cap goes, I've added in a bunch of my own matte caps. Now, this is kind of like overkill. This is like way too many matte caps, and most of the time I really don't use many of these matte caps, but these are just a bunch that I've downloaded online, so I thought I might as well add them. So what you can do to add in matte caps is to click on Edit, go to the Preferences, nodes. And then you can go here to lights, and then you can see there are matte caps, so you can click on the install button and install your own matte caps. And I do have a tutorial showing you how you can install your own matte caps and also how to create your own matte caps. So links in the description if you want to check out that video. Now, as far as the ones that I actually use, I mainly just use like these ones for sculpting, and then also just some of these gray ones for just 3D modeling, but most of the other ones I don't use. Now also, this is the default matte cap that I use, and so I'll actually have a link in the video description if you want to download this matte cap. This is the main one that I use. Now earlier in the video I talked about the Rigify add-on, so if I just go to the add menu, I can go down here to armature, and there are these Rigify meta rigs. So there's like a human, there's different animals and things, so this is pretty cool. And what I do is I actually add a human, and I bring this human over to the front and then bring it down. Now why I add this in my default startup file is because this armature is roughly the size of a real life human using the real life scale in Blender. And so why I like to do this is to remind me to model things to the real life scale in Blender. Because for so many years when I was first learning Blender, I would just model anything the size that I liked. So if I were modeling like a Rubik's Cube, I have a Rubik's Cube tutorial, I would just model the Rubik's Cube at this size. So, you know, here's the Rubik's Cube. But then let's say that I wanted to model like a dining room table, I would like add a plane, I would scale it up like this, and then I could like make the table legs and there. So let's just say this is the table legs, so I'll extrude this out, but you can see this is a giant, massive table. So this is how big like the average human is in the real life scale in Blender. So I like adding a default armature so that I can just remind myself to model to the real life scale in Blender. Now, as far as sculpting goes, if I select the cube and go here to the sculpting workspace, it'll automatically take me into sculpt mode, but I don't really like having all of these tools right here because most of the time I don't use them. So I'll hit T to close that side panel. And then also again, like I don't really like using the gizmo here. So I'm just going to click on this button to hide the gizmo. Now you can see all the brushes are right down here, but for many years, the brushes were over here on the left side. Now I'm hoping that in the future, they will add a Blender update where they'll add an option to move the brushes. But right now I have a little trick for adding the brushes on the left side. So if you just click here to split the window, drag it over here, then what you can do is just click there and just close the brushes. So then over here on this side, you can drag the brushes up to make them bigger. And then if you click here, you can change the size here to make it bigger. But you can see if you make it too big, it's going to go away. So that's kind of annoying. So what you have to do is click here to open them back up. And then let's just drag this up here and then slowly drag the size up just so it's just big enough, like that big. So now it's just big enough. And then I can just drag this over here. So now it looks like all the previous Blender versions for many years, they always had the brushes on the side, because especially if you're sculpting like a character's head, you want as much vertical space as possible because a head is going to be vertical. So having just that extra space vertically, I just like that so much better. Let's go over to the shading tab, so the shader editor. And I really don't like using these other two things here. So what I'm going to do is click here in the corner and drag over and then let go to close that. And then I also don't really like using the image editor, so I close that. Now, as far as the nodes here goes, I just don't really like having the nodes way down here. It kind of feels really small. And a big reason why I don't like using this is because there's all this extra space here and there's all this extra space here. And so what I do instead is click here to drag and split the window, and then I just drag this up here and then drag this right down here and then drag this over. So now you can see I have a nice kind of squarish window here, and then I can make this smaller, and I have a really big shader editor. And then also if you open up the viewport overlays, I turn off the HDRI preview just because I really don't care for the HDRI preview. I really just don't find it that useful. So now let's go to the geometry node editor. So we'll go to geometry nodes, and this here is the spreadsheet, but for most things I don't use it. I only use it very occasionally. So I just click here and close it, but I can of course open it up whenever I want. And then also I'll do the same thing here. So split the window, drag this down here and drag this up here so that we have a really nice big geometry node workspace. Now I also do video editing in Blender, and I do have a video editing for complete beginners tutorial series if you want to check that out. So I click on the plus here and I change this to video editing and add video editing. So now you can say I have a video editing workspace because I use video editing so much. Now I don't really like using the file browser because I just hit Shift A to add things, or I just drag and drop them from my file browser on another window. So I just close that. So I have more space. I also hit hit the T key to close those side panels because I don't like that. And then also I turn off the snapping features because I don't like using the snapping. And then also I don't like using the channels, so I hide that. I just like to make everything as minimalistic as possible. Also here on the resolution X and Y, this is for video editing and 3D rendering. I have this set to 2560 by 1440. So this is like the standard 2K resolution, and this is also the resolution of my monitor. And so because I'm screen recording with OBS, my recording software, this is the resolution that it's going to record because it's recording my screen. So that's how I have it set to. Now if I just open up the timeline here and click on playback, I have the sync here set to sync to audio. And I turn this on so that the audio and video are always synced up. And also it'll make sure that the video editor doesn't fall behind, because if you change it to play every frame, but then you add in like a really large video, then the video might start to lag, and then also the audio and video won't be synced up. So I just have this set to sync to audio. And I also turn on the scrubbing, so as I'm video editing, I can listen to the audio scrubbing as you're dragging it over some audio. And I'm just going to close this to make it smaller. Now also, I like to use the graph editor in the video editor because I like to edit keyframes if I'm like doing something that I'm like fading in or out or doing a basic animation. So I click over here and drag out, and then I change this to the graph editor. But then I just close this here, and just make it really small. So then if I'm doing an animation, I can just quickly pull this out, do some animation, and then just make it really small once I'm done. Let's now click over here to the compositor. And so I want to click on use nodes to use the compositing nodes. Now I'm clicking on use nodes here, but I don't actually use compositing in every Blender scene. But that's because I want to use the GPU in the compositor. So if I hit N to open the side panel and click on options, I can change the device to GPU. So now Blender's always going to use my GPU, which will speed up the compositing. So I can close the side panel, but then because I'm not using the compositor for every project, I click on use nodes here to disable it. So this will disable the nodes, so the compositor won't actually be compositing unless I click on use nodes, and then the compositor will become active. And then one more quick thing that I forgot to add is I also like to click here and split the window, and then I like to change this to the 3D viewport. Then I hit 0 to go into the camera view, and then I also click here to turn off the gizmo. Then what I do is go into the rendered viewport mode, and then I click on the drop down and I change the compositor to always. And so this way I'll be able to always see the viewport compositing in this window here if I want to see what it's actually looking like in the viewport. So let's now go back here to the layout. Now I also like to add some quick favorites. So if you hit the Q button, that's going to bring up your quick favorites. So if I click on object and click on set origin, I like to use some of these. So the origin to geometry, I'll right click and click on add to quick favorites. And then also the origin to 3D cursor, I'll right click and click on add to quick favorites. That way, instead of clicking on object, set origin, and then choosing it, I can just hit Q and then use one of these options. Now to make sure these are always turned on in your default Blender projects, you'll need to click on edit to go to the preferences, and then you'll need to click on save preferences. Now also if I click on file and go down here to cleanup, there is this purge unused data. And this is very useful, especially because I sell 3D models and asset packs. So it's nice just to purge unused data just in case there's like random textures or random materials, which I added into the Blender file, but then they aren't being used anymore. So this will purge any unused data. So I'm just going to right click and add to quick favorites. Now I also have some asset packs like my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack and also my Furniture and Home Asset Pack. And of course, links in the description if you want to download them. And so what I'm going to do is click on the plus here, and I'm just going to click on a new general and just add a new layout. So just add a new layout. I'll double click on this to rename it and just rename this to assets. So now what I do is I click here to split the window, and then I click here to split the window again. And then also I can close the timeline. And so this here, I can change this to the shader editor because I often use my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So I can add in my procedural materials. And then right here, I change this one to the asset browser. And then right now it's just showing you all the default things which are like pre-built into Blender, but I'm instead going to be adding in some of my asset libraries into Blender. So I'll click on edit and I'll go to the preferences, I'll go to file paths, and then I'll click on the plus here to add a new asset library. And so I'm adding in my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. So I'm just going to the folder where I have my Ultimate Material Pack, and I'll add asset library, and I can rename this. All right. And then I'm also going to add in my Furniture and Home Asset Pack. So I'm going to go into the folder, go into full version, go in here to the furniture and home asset pack, and then click on add asset library. And then of course you can save the preferences. So now right here, I can click on all libraries and I can add my ultimate material pack. So here's my ultimate material pack. I can like maybe turn the size down. And so these have all of my procedural materials. And as I create more materials, I update the ultimate material pack every time I create 10 more procedural materials. And then also here is my furniture and home asset pack. All right, so once everything is finally done, I'll go back here to the layout and I'll just kind of zoom over to like right here or something. Just kind of set this up however you want. And then finally, once everything is set up, you can click on File, you can click on Defaults, and then you can click on Save Startup File. And so when you do that, every time you open up Blender, it's going to open up using all of your default settings. So let me know if you find any of these things useful, and let me know if you're going to add any of these things to your default startup file. And also if you have any tips for me or any ideas of how I can improve my default startup file, or anything else that you'd like to share with everyone of how you set up your default startup file, definitely let us all know in the comments. So that'll be it for this video. So I hope you found the video helpful, and thank you for watching.